بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله وكفاه والصلاة والسلام على رسوله المصطفى وعلى عباده الذين ارتضى ومن بهداهم اهتدى وبآثار أهل المدينة اقتفى وبعد. We've reached Salatul Jum'ah in the Qawa'id of Qadi Iyad. Prior to beginning this, he concludes by saying فَتَمَّتْ خِصَالُ الصَّلَوَاتِ الْخَمْسِ بِهَذَا مِئَةَ خَصْلَةٍ, that with this we have concluded the certain matters of Salah as 100 characteristics of Salah. He now begins what is Salatul Jum'ah, and he will be discussing the conditions of obligation. He will be going through certain obligations that Jum'ah has which are peculiar to it as opposed to the other 5 prayers. He will speak about the sunan it has which are very particular to it as well. And then he will also go into certain things which are forbidden for it and so on. And then slightly generalize a bit into regular salawat after that. So, Bismillah.
فأما صلاة الجمعة فهي من فروض الأعيان وهي بدل من الظهر وشروط وجوبها على من تلزمه الصلوات الخمس 10: الذكورية والحرية ونية الإقامة ومصر أو قرية من قراه على فرسخ وأقل منه، أو قرية يمكن استيطانها جامعة ل40 بيتا أو 30 فأكثر تشبه المصر في صورتها، وجماعة كثيرة ممن تلزمهم الجمعة تبنى لمثلهم الأوطان، وجامع وإمام من أهلها يحسن إقامتها لهم، ومعرفة يومها وبقاء وقتها والقدرة على السعي إليها وارتفاع الأعذار المرخصة في التخلف عنها.
Shukran. He begins by saying, as to Salatul Jum'ah, he says, then it is from the individual obligations and it is a substitute for Dhuhr. It is, so this in itself is a bit of a debate, although not perhaps much, but people like Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal did not really see Jum'ah as a badal of Dhuhr. They saw this as a separate obligation which comes and which occurs on a Friday, so it's not actually, and this does have some ikhtilaf in it, especially when we're looking at things like the timing of it, as with the Hanabila, some of them allowing it prior to or before Zawal, and it also has the debate of, well, what if it's missed and so on, and what then, and although that's, people will kind of accept that you do Dhuhr. It's also, this not being a badal seems to be what Shawkani tends to go to as well. But it is fard, it's an obligation that is agreed upon, although there is a transmission from Ibn Wahab saying that it's sunnah, but people say he didn't mean by that like a regular sunnah, he meant an obligation, but he just said as, like he was trying to say as though it's been established by the sunnah. But even then, I don't know if that interpretation is good because it's in the Quran, Salatul Jum'ah is, so, but nevertheless he didn't mean sunnah, he meant fard. The conditions of its obligation are upon those people whose salah is obligatory upon, and he begins by then enumerating the conditions, saying dhukuriya, that upon males. So Jum'ah is not obligatory upon females, although they can still perform Jum'ah and it's valid.
Mufti, sorry, on that point then, for the Hanabila, do the women have to pray Dhuhr?
They would pray Dhuhr if they don't, if they didn't pray the Jum'ah.
No, I think because it's not badal.
Oh, right. No, they still say that they're addressed with, like, but they're not addressed with it as a as an obligation, but as a sunnah type of thing. It's like they still say it's good for them to do it if there's no, they'll mention if there's no fitna, if there's no this or no that. They still encourage them, but they don't say it's an obligation upon them. And the obligation thing is perhaps seen more as a rukhsa for them, because they're perhaps going to be engaged in work and so on. And
so if they pray Jum'ah in a mosque, for instance, they don't have to pray Dhuhr?
No, you definitely don't have to pray Dhuhr. Definitely not. Well, hurriya, freedom, وَنِيَّةُ الْإِقَامَةِ, having the intention of being resident. This means that you're not a traveller. وَمِصْرَ أو قرية من قراها لا فرسخ, that it is a town. So you don't have to really, in tiny or in small villages and things like that, you don't pray Jum'ah generally. And it's interesting how some ulama have taken almost a harsh stance on that historically, including people like Muhammad ibn Sahnun actually transmits from his father Sahnun, saying he would prevent the people of Monastir, Monastir, which is in modern day Tunisia, I believe, is it not? Which actually, I believe, got its name originally from a monastery that was there, like a Christian monastery. In Arabic, they call it Monastir. And that he says Sahnun would prevent them from praying Jum'ah, saying that no, it's not.
In the monastery?
No, by that time, the town is called Monastir. But so you see some people taking it to some extents, really. Or anybody so it's obligatory upon a town, or if you live within a farsakh, which is about 3 miles of a town. And this is based upon, once again, not that the Prophet ﷺ necessarily said anybody who lives within 3 miles of a masjid, but it's based upon the fact that people, one, the Prophet ﷺ said if you could hear the adhan, then fa'ajib. But that's one angle. But the other is the people of the awali. And the awali were these type of it was this type of region outside of Medina, which were the upper lands, like some type of hilly region that was there, which had some settlements there, and they were known as the awali. And people from the awali would come to Medina to pray Jum'ah, and they were approximately about a farsakh away from Medina. So some people have used that as they believe. Or he mentions, or if it's a town which has at least, he says that at least 40 residents, or he has basically has a number of people which make it look like a functioning town. Now, and what about the number of people that must be resident, or that must attend Jum'ah? They say that there must be a Jama'ah, and they don't give a number here at this stage. You'll see that he just says from who, generally, such a number of people that would make either a town or a residence, really. He then mentions also a masjid, and we will go into these in a bit more detail momentarily. So he says a masjid, an imam of those people, يحسن إقامتها لهم, somebody who can establish the Jum'ah for them, somebody who knows when it is Friday. Somebody, that's what it says, ma'rifatu yawmiha. Right, somebody who would stay there for that duration, and somebody that is capable of making it there and establishing it. And also he then mentions having someone who has all excuses or preventative measures removed. So for example, that's just common sense in this, he's not having a bout of insanity, or if it's a woman, she's not on a menstruation, or if it's, if he's ill, it's not that he's got some type of illness which is preventing him from going to the masjid. So he's not prevented by any of these type of things. Normally they don't always mention stuff like that. Like I said, Qadi Iyad is probably bringing it in to round off the numbers and make it sound smooth, to kind of smoothen the whole thing up.
Mufti, when he says وَالْقُدْرَةُ عَلَى السَّعْيِ,
Yeah.
He's just basically using the Quranic terms, right? And he doesn't, all he means is that you have the ability physically to go.
Yeah, to make it to the masjid, that's all. No. Because the Maliki, we'll come to that in a moment actually, when we're going to discuss the next section. وَفَرُوضُ الزَّائِدَةِ. So then he says, he'll speak about now extra obligations for Jum'ah.
Is he going to expand on what he means by Jami here?
Jami', yeah, we're going to in this section now.
وفروضها الزائدة على فروض الصلاة المختصة بها 10: الإمام والجماعة والجامع والسعي إليها والخطبة وترك اللغو فيها والطهارة منه لها والإنصات لها وإن لم يسمعها وتقديمها على الصلاة وصلاتها ركعتين والأذان لها وقيل سنة.
Shukran. The obligations which are specific to Jum'ah. He mentions the Imam. Jum'ah must have an Imam, which is common sense. Right, so, wal Jama'ah, it must have a Jama'ah. Now, I know that within the Hanafi madhab, there is even 2 or 3 are allowed, including the Imam. There's a debate, including the Imam or excluding the Imam. So 2 people are allowed, the absolute minimum. They say aqallul jama'ah ithnan, that the least of a group are 2. And does that include the Imam or exclude him? With some debate in the Hanafi madhab. I know it's similar, if I recall correctly, to what Ibn Hazm takes that approach as well. But generally you will see, like the other madhab say, no, there must be a sound group. Like people, if we saw them, we'd say they were a group. Like to them, we would not actually count as a group. They would say that we're actually, like some have said a minimum 12, like some of the Shafi'iyya have said, some Malikiyya have even said that. And I think that's actually a weak argument that they adopted in those that have said that they said, because in the verse of the Quran, that where Allah mentions وَتَرَكُوكَ قَائِمًا, that they left you standing when they went off to see the caravan. The hadith quotes that only 12 people remained. And the Prophet ﷺ continued with Jum'ah, so they're saying, oh, so the least number is 12. But that's more coincidental than it being, it's more descriptive than prescriptive. You see what I mean? So that's not really a good type of evidence. Some have said 30, some have said 40, but we'll go through that in a moment. But there must be a jama'ah, there must be a jami'. A jami', this is now quite Maliki in a sense, like many of the Maliki have adopted this, that there must be a specific masjid for Jum'ah. It can't just be read anywhere. This has surprisingly not been as challenged as you might expect within the madhab. People have just generally kind of just passed it through and just accepted it. Now, some people have challenged this condition. They've said, like people like Ibn al-Faras in his Ahkam al-Quran, who was a great Maliki scholar as well, and including Ibn Rushd al-Hafid. They have said that, look, they've said kind of like, look, come on guys, like if you read this thing, he's like, where's that? Like you said, look, there's no clear dalil to be saying that it's a condition, meaning that the whole Jum'ah would be invalid without it. This is what he kind of tries to say. But generally people have passed it within the Maliki madhab as saying, look, this is a condition. In this country, in my understanding, it would be absolutely fine to pray Jum'ah in institutes or institutions or any type of place like at work or wherever people do offer Jum'ah, and it is not a jami'. In my understanding, I believe that to be absolutely valid. There's no problem with that. And really, this condition that the Maliki applied, I believe, as Ibn Rushd says in his Bidayat al-Mujtahid, that they were just being too stringent on it. And to the extent that you see Abu Walid al-Baji, when he's discussing this, he goes off to discuss, okay, what if the masjid, like, because they say, okay, what is a masjid? They've then said, what is a jami'? So they said, okay, it's 4 walls and it's like this. Like basically, so then they've got the discussion, okay, what if the roof's kind of dilapidated, so it's just 4 walls? So is that still okay? So they've got this debate, right? So Al-Baji says, like, no, like what? And he goes on this, like he has a little go at this, that, you know, wait a minute, no, it must be musaqqaf. It must have a roof. And if the roof isn't there, then you can't count it. And Ibn al-Arabi quotes him in his commentary on Tirmidhi, on the Muwatta actually, in his Masalik, saying that, look, he says that the Sheikh al-Baji has really kind of like almost, you know, with respect, kind of a bit lost it on this one. Like he says that, you know, what he says, like he's made a mistake. That what is, like, what's all this like pedantic type of approach to this? Is it musaqqaf? Is it not musaqqaf? Does it have a roof? Is it a full roof? Is it this? Like, look, it's a masjid, full stop. Like, and rather, even the condition of a masjid really has just been applied. If anything, I would say that in all truthness, it is perhaps a shartu kamal. Like it's a shart, a condition of perfection, to perfect something. It's not a condition of sihha. And don't find that strange, because, for example, the Maliki, Imam Malik on many occasions, like let's say when you're looking at masail of marriage, for example, the wali is they say it's a shart for the woman to get married. She needs a wali, she needs a guardian. Now you'll see Imam Malik's fatwa, they generally address this, all the ulama have passed this down, yet people like Ibn Rushd and so on will basing upon some of the fatwa of Imam Malik say that this condition is a shart, but it's actually a shart to kamal, and it's not a shart to sihha. Although it seems like that, because look, here Imam Malik's got a fatwa saying, oh, if a girl, for example, she wasn't of an elite class or anything, she didn't have like some type of special status about her. In fact, they use the Arabic dani'a, like she was in fact quite like of a low status. And he's asked, what about a girl like this that just got married without a wali? And he says, oh, it's okay. So Ibn Rushd, when commenting on that, says, and that's the judge saying that, look, this shows that maybe that condition is actually a condition of perfection and it's not a condition of validity. So just some food for thought there.
One thing, in istilahi terms, can one city have more than one jamia?
We are going to come to that in a moment. We're going to come to that. But yes, it can. Okay, but we're going to come to that. So,
I remember for the Ashbawiyah,
now,
he cited a narration from Sayyidina Ali
okay,
saying that the Jummah was in
was in the
I'm just trying to find it.
Best that you quote it properly first.
right.
Right.
في كل something في كل جامع. Yeah.
في كل مصر
جامع.
جامع.
في كل مصر جامع. Yeah. But there it does say Misr. Usually it says like in a city jami, and you'd understand jami to be perhaps an adjective for the word Misr. But even if you did understand it to just be fi kulli jami, that would be understood in this context as saying that is the kamal, that is the perfect way to do this. The debate, and that is generally how you should do it. But in this country, like you see the way people pray Jummah all the time at universities, they pray at workplaces, they pray here in stations and wherever they are. This, you don't like. It doesn't make sense to try and say that these type of Jummah are invalid and stuff like this. You see, especially when there isn't a clear dalil for that anyway. Now, so and then he says, making your way to the Jum'ah wa sa'i laha ilayha wal khutbah. Now the khutbah, right, is an obligation, and it must be in Arabic, and it must be something which is some type of speech, which sounds like a. We had a very interesting discussion on this during the Ashmawiyah, I believe. Must it be a recital? But the thing is, it's right. So the thing is that the khutbah, but it must be in Arabic. Now, to the extent that some of the Malikiyah say that, they've said that, look, if somebody can't, if there was nobody man yuhsin al khutbah or man yuhsin al Arabiya, somebody who could not speak Arabic, couldn't do the khutbah, they say they don't pray Jummah.
That's what they do.
To that extent. Having said that, there is some ikhtilaf.
Is that the mashhur?
That is the mashhur type of opinion generally. That is what they say. Although majishun, alright, majishun. You've got to say the Malikiyah have killed it with the names though. That's something they have. They must have, Malikiyah have the coolest names there are. So, al-majishun, he actually transmits, his opinion and understanding, he's one of the Medinan students of Imam Malik, is that the khutbah is actually sunnah. And then Abu Zayd, who transmits many things from him, he has these books which narrate from Imam Malik. He has these 8 books known as Thamaniyatu Abi Zayd. This isn't Ibn Abi Zayd, by the way. This is Abu Zayd. This is somebody else. They call him, he has another name as well, Ibn Tariq al-Faras or something. But he has a riwayah from Imam Malik saying it's sunnah as well. The point being that with these riwayat, you can make ease. Okay, at times. I'm just saying it's not worst case, but a person should always try to have some Arabic in the khutbah.
How come this can't be looked at as a condition of perfection then as opposed to a condition of validity?
The difference here is that there are some dala'il for stuff like this. It isn't like
Isn't there Delilah for the Muslim as well?
yeah, coincidental, circumstantial dala'il. But here, like Allah is saying, فَاسْعَوْا إِلَىٰ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ, hasten to the dhikr of Allah, which at that point is the khutbah that will be taking place.
Yeah, but
Now,
that doesn't necessarily have to be done in Arabic. My point is the Arabic part of it as opposed to the khutbah.
you see, the
the
thing
Arabic
about
part.
the Arabic part is that
Or is it a
what it
conditional
comes to
community and not
is that,
conditional
you see, is it more a ritual or is it trying to serve a different, remember we discussed this during the Ashmawiyah, what is the main purpose of the khutbah during Jum'ah? We know it conveys a message and we know it has a worship element to it. Which preponderates? Which is the primary concern? Now, because Allah says, فَاسْعَوْا إِلَىٰ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ, that hasten to the dhikr of Allah. The ulama, especially the Malikiyah, said that the dhikr is in Arabic and therefore that preponderates. So yes, it has a message, but what's more important is the ritual. Just as the adhan has a message, but what's more important is the ritual. So you wouldn't say, nobody understands Arabic, let's start calling people in English. It wouldn't, because the ritual element it preponderates in that mas'ala.
But Mufti, on that point, we speak in different languages in the salah, potentially we can do in dua,
Okay.
right? So
In
if you
dua only.
Yeah, so if you can do that in the salah, it would make sense that you could do the same in the khutbah if no one can speak Arabic.
Right, okay, this is why I said if nobody could do Arabic, what I would advise is that surely you can say some, if they can read salah, I'm sure they can utter some words of Arabic. Like, have some praise, some alhamdulillah, some this, some that, and then do the rest of your speech in whatever you have to do.
That's practically speaking, but I'm talking about in theory, like as a principle. The rulings are not consistent. It seems.
Not really, because even in salah they don't say to those people who don't know any salah. If you remember the masail of somebody who's entered Islam new and he doesn't know any Arabic, they don't say to him, start reading in your own language.
Yeah,
It's only the dua. They just say it's
Okay.
then dropped. That's all.
That's an argument against the
But-
point you make.
No, I see what you're
No.
saying, because it's just dua.
It's dua. Like the dua they allow, but they don't allow any of the ritual, because they don't see the dua as the ritual.
Yeah.
They see the dua as just functional. But any ritual within salah, like you actually reading Fatiha, reading a surah, doing tasbih, they don't say because you're struggling, do this in your own language.
No, but the way you said
That sounds
the way you said that, if they don't know Arabic, then they don't do the khutbah. But they don't say if you don't know Arabic, don't do the salah, do they?
Well, they say subhanallah or la ilaha
They just
illallah.
say
They
anything
still
and
say
just
something very
imitate the type of actions and stuff like this until you learn. And they say, but I mean in the khutbah they're not going to say just stand and just
simple. Pretend to talk.
pretend, mime, YouTube. Well, to be fair, I think basic level of Arabic everybody would have. Say Surah Fatiha for example. I think everybody could get up there and read Surah Fatiha. It's not leaving any type of lahu is like how are we gonna just basically any type of distraction.
Idle talk, isn't it?
Yeah, idle talk, but also just generally as well. I think it does also the talk, but it could also just be, he'll probably elaborate further anyway, but it could just be unnecessary type of fidgeting or doing something, or just lahu, like anything which is like null and void, just leave it. But generally you're right, there is the element of speaking, but it's in actions as well. It doesn't have to, it could be really nowadays, you doing anything, I suppose, maybe texting and doing this and that whilst the actual Arabic of the khutbah is going on.
أعتقد في الموطأ إمام الحديث الذي رواه الإمام مالك عن ابن عمر الذي يقول من مس الحصى فقد لغى.
صح.
وفي رواية أخرى ومن لغى فلا جمعة له. ممكن اللغو يكون في مس أي شيء.
صح.
يعني
أحسنت, شكرا شيخ. Ustad said the hadith in the Muwatta by Ibn Umar of whoever is kind of playing around with the pebbles and the stones during Jum'ah, then he has committed or conducted lahu, this type of distractive behavior, and whoever does lahu, it's as though he has no Jum'ah. And so Lagho, like I said, in this day and age, what could be very common is people on the phones, texting, emailing, Facebooking, I don't know, whatever they're doing, right? So,
Would that be okay to do if the khutbah wasn't in Arabic?
no, it wouldn't really be okay. You shouldn't be doing it during the khutbah, right? But
That khutbah doesn't count anyway.
it's like you're saying as though it's against Islam almost.
Like you're deliberately going out your phone and put YouTube on it.
That's not Arabic.
Right, so
If you can understand it, it's just a waste of time.
if you can understand it. No, they say historically some of the Salaf used to prove a point against some of the people. Yeah, you've probably read that. Sa'id ibn Jubayr, and if you khutbat al-Hajjaj,
No.
they used to say he used to come and sit and start talking on purpose. Well, we know that didn't end well because it ended with his execution. So, but
He stood up to him.
but he did. Oh, that he was a legend. He was a legend. That's Sa'id ibn Jubayr I'm talking about, not Hajjaj. In case you're mixing them up. But it's anybody who hasn't read their story needs to read it. So and right, so being in a state of purification, like having in a state of tahara for the actual khutbah, although this has been said, this is put as an obligation, although some people like Qadi Abdul Wahhab al-Baghdadi and Ibn al-Jallab did say it was a sunnah, but generally that is the fact that if you're going to do the khutbah, like being in a state of purity is necessary, because obviously as soon as you finish it, it's going to be the salah. You ain't going to go like, okay, I've got to shoot off and got to come back. And so being silent for the khutbah, even if you don't hear it, this generally is the stance within the Maliki school. I know within my understanding, if I recall correctly, I think Ahmad ibn Hanbal and maybe Ishaq ibn Rahaway, but some other schools, they say that if you can't hear it, the obligation then falls, like you can be kind of talking or it's not too much of a big deal, but that's generally not the Maliki understanding. وَتَقْدِيمُهَا عَلَى الصَّلَاةِ, the fact that the khutbah is before the salah. وَصَلَاتُهَا رَكْعَتَانِ, and praying 2 rak'ah and having the adhan before it. The reason being that in the early days, in Jum'ah, the khutbah would be after the salah. So this is why in the hadith, in the verse of the Quran, that when they saw رَأَوْا تِجَارَةً أَوْ لَهْوًا انْفَضُّوا إِلَيْهَا وَتَرَكُوكَ قَائِمًا, that when they saw this tijar, saw this caravan, they left you and went off to this caravan. They didn't abandon the salah, they had actually prayed the salah already. But the thing is, in the early days, the khutbah used to come after, and then it was moved to before that. That's what a lot of the ulama write. Wallahu a'lam.
Mufti, how can it grammatically be rak'atain? وَصَلَاتُهَا رَكْعَتَيْن.
وَصَلَاتُهَا رَكْعَتَانِ.
هنا ركعتين.
It's rak'atan. Yeah. Is it over there rak'atain? It generally should be rak'atan in the sense that should be the khabar.
It says that there's different nusukh, and in one of them it's rak'atan, and in others it's rak'atain. And in another it's rak'atain.
I mean, if you were to say rak'atain, then you would understand that there would be like a fi'al muqaddar, like in the sense, and the salatuha, like a'ni, or I mean by, or I specify rak'atain, or he prays wa salatuha yusalli rak'atain, like that. Do you see what I mean? So it'd be kind of maf'ul to a verb which is suppressed. Grammar. Allahu Akbar. By the way, everybody should be learning Arabic. And Ustad is your man right here, Ustad Khalifa, by the way, so should be utilizing him, inshallah. And the adhan is also necessary for Jum'ah. It's symbolic. Now,
وسننها المختصة بها الزائدة على سنن الصلاة 10 الغسل لها عند الرواح والطيب والسواك والتجمل في اللباس والجهر بالقراءة فيها قراءة الجمعة في الأولى واستقبال الإمام في خطبته وكونها خطبتين والجلوس أول الخطبة ووسطها والقيام في بقيتها واتخاذ المنبر لها.
Shukran. The ghusl, these are the sunan which are specific with Jum'ah. Ghusl which is kind of linked somehow to the actual leaving for salah. This is, you see, in the hadith it comes as al-ghusl wajib, and Imam Malik does transmit that hadith in the Muwatta, as are the transmissions in the Mudawwana. Some people have understood from this that Imam Malik is saying that ghusl is wajib for Jum'ah. Although some Malikiya have said that, like Ibn Sha'ban, that is not generally what Imam Malik was saying, and it is not the Maliki madhab generally that ghusl is wajib. They just, although they use the word wajib, that's just emphasizing, that's all. And really, if anything, because the next condition as well, you'll see wat-tib, and perfume, and was-siwak, and using like a miswak, wat-tajammul fil libas, and dressing well. Now you're trying to see that all of these things are really just trying to emphasize, not that everybody should kind of do themselves up for Jum'ah, but what it's also doing is it's giving people that regular practice. Apart from just saying, Muslims are encouraged to do this anyway, but it's kind of almost like, in a way, almost you could say like forcing them that, look, every week, not only are you going to kind of like make sure, you know, you do yourself up well, you do this, you take care of yourself, but you're also going to all generally come together. So it's going to create that type of aura for the community, if you like, that look at these people and so on, and it creates a presence. So it's very strategic from a social perspective, social engineering perspective, if you like. That it's very, it has huge benefits. So,
Mufti, just a quick thing. When he says
No.
عند الرواح,
now,
basically he's saying that if you do it after Fajr, for example, your ghusl, it's not what's meant.
that is the general, although Ibn Wahab, I believe, has said that, look, the ghusl, even if it's done after Subah, it's okay, it doesn't have to be connected. But generally they would say that, yeah, more or less connected with your departure for Jum'ah. The reason being is that the whole point of the Jum'ah, the ghusl, is, it was, you know, here, in my understanding, Allahu A'lam, it's less ritualistic and it's more about the freshness for the person. So obviously you got to think about it, a hot country, yeah, you might take a shower as you wake up, but by the time it's midday, you know, you'd probably be like all like hot again and this and that and sweating, and especially with they lived in deserts and stuff like that. So it made sense to have this connected with your rawah as you kind of leave for Jummah, so everybody's kind of fresh. No. And then he mentions والجهر بالقراءة فيها وقراءة الجمعة في الأولى, that the recitation should be audible, should be loud, and that the recitation of Surah Al-Jum'ah in the first rak'ah واستقبال الإمام في خطبتها. This once again is more of the Maliki madhab, that you face the Imam during the khutbah, that it's emphasized as a sunnah that the people, we don't just face the Qibla, we face the Imam. So because he is addressing us and we therefore pay attention to him, not just like, so if he's standing over there and so we're just facing this way, we actually face, I mean, it doesn't mean we have to physically, but we're kind of looking at him. And so that's the istiqbal. وَكَوْنُهَا خُطْبَتَيْن. Now this, the fact that the khutbahs are two khutbah, okay? Now this is generally a sunnah, although some people do transmit it as it being a wajib. So you do know that Ibn Habib does transmit from Ibn Qasim saying it's wajib. But generally, people will say that this is a sunnah. The fact that you have two khutbahs, you break them into two. That's not an obligation. Sitting at the beginning of the khutbah, then in the middle, and standing during the khutbah in essence. Right, that is a sunnah. Now, although most people have actually transmitted that as an obligation, almost. Although Qadi Iyad here has put it as a sunnah, Qadi Ibn Arabi also said it wasn't an obligation to stand. But you see that generally, a lot of people in their books, a lot of the Maliki have said that no, it's an obligation, you must stand during khutbah. And taking a mimbar for it. Now, that we do, I mean, once again, is from the sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ had a mimbar and his companions continued. And you see the whole thing, it's because the Prophet ﷺ would stand right at the top, and then Abu Bakr stood a step lower, and then Omar, and Uthman didn't reach. That was it, wasn't it? There were just 3 steps, wasn't it? And then when it came to Uthman's time, that the curious or the question was, well, what would he do? And it's amazing that, see, now that's leadership. Like, he went right back to the top and stood there and gave the khutbah. But it shows, I mean, it's interesting how you make that type of a decision. It does demonstrate leadership, and it does, once again, it really casts doubt on the people that have, astaghfirullah, criticized or critiqued Uthman radiallahu anhu for his leadership and stuff like that, because he was an amazing leader. The only thing was, he found himself with problems which those before him did not have. And you see a lot of his ijtihadat were amazing, in the sense, even we as the Malikiyah, who are like real big on things like masalih al-mursala, like where sometimes when the welfare is so great, you see how you can kind of almost step away from some of the rulings based on welfare, like you can suspend a ruling. You see this being practiced in Uthman's time, like splendidly. Like, you see like a very good practice of this in certain places, like when the people who find camels, and how the Prophet ﷺ said, you leave the camel, but he said now the state will repossess any camels unless somebody comes and takes them. And the way he kind of did certain things, it was really strategic. The thing was, the empire expanded so massively that obviously who would you put in charge of collecting all these taxes? And when communication is so slow, and power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's the thing, isn't it? So you put somebody in charge a few thousand miles away, I mean, you wouldn't even know what they're doing. So, and then obviously people he could trust were people who were close to him, people of his family, of his tribe, and he put a lot of Bani Umayyah in charge. Doc's face lights up with this claim to the Umayyads. Right. So, and obviously then that becomes the pretext for the fitan that followed. But inshallah, if Allah gives me tawfiq, someday I'll do that. I'll do or courage, shall we say. I'll do a whole course on something like that, beginning with Zubayr radiallahu an, and taking it full circle to Abdullah ibn Zubayr, and all the calamities or the trials and tribulations that befell the ummah within that period. It'd be very interesting.
Would you be the first one to start from Zubayr?
Of course.
I take my inspiration. I take my inspiration from many who have gone before me. But I'm sure it will be unique.
I'm sure.
Right. Okay. So, right now, وفضائلها.
وفضائلها المستحبات لها المختصة بها 10. التجهير لها، وصلة الغسل بالرواح لها، واستعمال خصال الفطرة من قص الشارب ونتف الإبط، والاستحداد وتقليم الأظافر، والاقتصاد في خطبتها، والتوكؤ على عصا أو سيف وشبهه فيها، واشتمالها على الثناء على الله تعالى وحمده، والشهادتين والتذكير، وقراءة آية من القرآن، والدعاء للأئمة، والركوع قبلها ما لم يخرج الإمام، وترك الركوب في السعي إليها، وكثرة الذكر والدعاء قبلها وبعدها، والصدقة قبلها.
These are the recommended, the virtuous type of actions associated with Jum'ah. So tahjir, trying to go early, right? Something I think some of us from especially the Pak region just don't have hardwired in our DNA. But silatul ghusl, this is having it connected, once again the Jum'ah connected with your departure for going to the ghusl, connected with your leaving for Jum'ah. واستعمال الخصال, right now, once again, doing things like the actions or cleanliness or watching over the actions of fitrah, which appear in several ahadith varying from 5 to 10 or however you want to see them, but things like trimming the tash, that's for men. Obviously women shouldn't you shouldn't really have to, unless trimming wouldn't be the thing then, but whether it's going to be things like removing hair from, let's say, under the arms, or it's going to be around the private parts, or trimming the nails. And then it mentions things like this is now going back to the khatib. It's now taken a jump forward and gone straight to the khatib. The khutbah that he delivers, is recommended that he does it like it's moderate, as in what he's trying to say is it doesn't go on and it's not totally tiny. It's moderate in all its aspects really. And then tawakku ala asan aw sayf. Allahu Akbar. See, if we had this style, this would be slick. Don't you think so? Like leaning on a sword or a stick. I think a samurai.
Of course.
Wallahi, I think that would be so. It could just be monumental, but it'd be so stylish to have like a samurai sword. So, and some of the ulama have tried to challenge that, because there's a hadith in Ibn Majah, Bayhaqi and Hakim as well, where they say that the Prophet ﷺ would lean on a stick before he took the mimbar, and they say this was before he took qabla an ya'khud al-mimbar, but qabla an ittakhadha al-mimbar, before he took the mimbar. Now, but the Malikiya didn't accept that. They said that this was generally like one of the recommended acts for the khatib, that he does lean upon a stick, or sometimes they've said a bow historically, or a sword. What else could we put in there? Right.
AK-47.
Right, but something nunchuckers. It's just like khatib's just like swinging them like that. Inna alhamdulillah. Right, so he's got, so that's still there. وَاشْتِمَالُهَا, the khutbah should comprise of praising Allah, glorifying Him, the shahadatain, remembering Allah. It should have a verse at least of the Quran. It should have a dua for the a'imma, the leaders and imams of this ummah. It doesn't necessarily mean by leaders as in like presidents and prime ministers, by the way. I'm just saying that, although that is the practice in a lot of the Arab countries, although I don't know if they still continue with that practice.
Why do you say that? Because that's what it suggests, doesn't it?
Yeah. Actually, to be fair, they did used to say the Khalifa and the Imams, they did used to call them in the khutbah. It was, the reason it had some importance was it used to let people know who the current leader is. That was one of the functions, that people used to actually know that who is our leader actually by attending the Jummah. Because a lot of people remember that where there wasn't media, and then how did you spread, like how would every person, every farmer, every whatever, how would they know about the politics? Either they're just keeping up to date with it, or somebody's telling them, or if they're busy, they just wouldn't know. Like, and especially where you had kathratul taghallubat, where you had people like one person assassinating the other, and this week now he's the leader, and 2 months later somebody else is the leader, and so what you would have is in the khutbah they would mention their names. And also it was good that they would pray to Allah that give them guidance, strengthen them and defend them and so on. But obviously, I'm just saying today the situation's changed a bit. The whole country status is now, it's not exactly like that. Obviously presidents, prime ministers, bringing them into the khutbah, I don't know, I just find it a bit strange really, trying to, I don't know, I mean,
Is this from Amal, or is this from a hadith text?
There's
some dua for the imam?
No, generally you do find that, like nusah, that the Prophet says, have nusah li'ammatihim wa li'a'immatihim, do have like, for the leaders, for this, have, and make dua for them and stuff like this. But that's, you see, that leadership generally, there was always, leaders were also people who were leading or had some importance for the deen as well. Even if they weren't, like, all the khulafa and stuff like this that came, and the umara and the salatin, they weren't necessarily religious, like the way, you might think, like, they weren't like the scholars. They were separate entities to the scholars. But they had this type of, like many of them did have this thing that, okay, we do kind of represent the Muslim civilization as a Muslim, as in it being Muslim, and they did have a bit of, although many did sell out as well, but the point is that this is why it did have that, you know, praying for their kind of like steadfastness and so on. It did make sense.
When the Khalifa was giving a khutbah, would he make dua for himself? Like when Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman, etc., when they used to...
You see, I don't think they would do themselves, single themselves out, but they would just say, like, you know, like they would keep a general. To be fair, once the Khulafa really took control, like, as in, I don't mean the Khulafa Rashidun, I mean later Salatin, Sultans and Amirs, and they didn't really used to do the Jummah khutbahs anymore. I know Bani Umayyah did, but even once like Bani al-Abbas are really there, even towards the end of Bani Umayyah, you're not going to see that they are actually leading the khutbahs anymore. They would have the scholars doing them. They would have like the scholars doing the khutbahs, and so scholars would always kind of really deal with that, and they would just be present, sitting down. In fact, the famous story of Abdurrahman and Nasir, after he finishes his Zahra, Madinah to Zahra, he finishes his outside of Qurtuba, and he's really like, oh, this is so amazing, it's awesome, look at this, look at that. And then that Jum'ah, and then Sa'id, what's his name, Mundhir ibn Sa'id al-Balati, that he, one of the major fuqaha of Qurtuba, does his khutbah, it tears into him, into Nasir in that khutbah, like really he says, and people who build this of the dunya and that and this and that, and really in front of everybody. It actually, to be fair, actually hurt, and you could say like cut up Abdurrahman and Nasir quite deep, actually, that did. Because when he goes back to his palace, he says to his the people around him, he says that, you know, he says Mundhir ibn Sa'id, he says he didn't intend anybody except me with that speech. And he says that, you know, and they say, is it like that? They say that, you know, in that case, we'll get him, we'll remove him, because he had a high post he was a high judge as well. And he said, like, his response to that was, oh, if we were to remove him, then how would we answer to Allah in that sense? Like, obviously, like, meaning like he is one of the most qualified. But he said that, you know what, he said that was wrong of him to kind of target me in front of everybody like that. And they say he was really hurt by it. They never went back to his Jummah ever again. They say, but he didn't remove him from his post. You see, he had the power to easily dispose of him, but he didn't.
What a courageous scholar.
He was a courageous scholar, I must say.
But the Khalifa was quite...
the Khalifa was absolutely a legend, Nasir. Abdurrahman and Nasir is one of the greatest leaders from the Umara, if you like, of this Ummah. He declared himself Khalif of the Ummah. I mean, that's how... Obviously, in his time, he was so powerful. He was somebody that... I mean, this is, inshallah, when you come on the tour. Right, all of you have to attend the tour, by the way. Right, so when you come on the tour, you will see that you see the things he set up, and even the protocol and the stuff, like he was the one that, you know, in Madinah to Zahra, he would have where he would stand by the palace, and he would have that whole, you know, the windows in such a way that it would cast a light in front of him, and it would create this whole silhouette, and you couldn't actually see him, but you could just hear him speak, and he created that awe-striking type of effect. And they say in his palace he had, I mean, they say that he had like actually quicksilver, but although that's been debated, but he had some type of liquid that would give off this type of glittery like type of effect to the whole room where he was. And he had the masjid like significantly expanded to become one of the largest masjids in the entire Muslim world. In fact, in its time it became the largest mosque. Qurtuba was much larger than any other masjid anywhere else. So and in his time, you see these letters, he gets these letters, including a letter from the King of England at the time, who finishes it by saying, Khadimukum, like your servant, and in Arabic, and, you know, and this and that, and they send him gifts, and they say that, you know, he was so established, and he had this thing. What is interesting though, he had this thing of trying to, you know, this whole, like, even though it's very powerful, this identity, because obviously they were Bani Umayyah. But most of the Umara of Bani Umayyah in Andalus were, because of their mothers, were usually a lot of them were like, let's say, originally slaves or stuff like this that had been freed women. So they were mainly Spaniards or people like that and so on. So a lot of them, in fact, Ibn Hazm writes almost all of them, of the Umara, all either blonde or ginger. That's what they were. So they weren't actually, none of them were kind of dark haired like the Arabs. So Abdul Rahman al-Nasir, is known about him that what he would do is dye his beard and hair black, like jet black, and he would try to have that like very Arab look about him, like, you know, this whole Bani Umayyah thing. But hey, that's something you can learn a lot more about, inshallah, when you go on discoverlandalus.com. Are you jotting that down?
Malik is going to put that on Facebook tomorrow.
Alright, okay.
Is there any contention of this issue of mentioning the Imam on the Mimbar?
What they do say is, if the Imam, if you mean like presidents and prime ministers, or you mean like
in general, then
just like imams, as in religious imams,
the leaders, the government,
the presidents and prime ministers, and that, if they're fusaq, if they're people who are like have an anti-Islamic agenda or like a bit anti-Islam, then you should really mention them. Like,
so was this something that happened with Shatabi, that he stopped mentioning the?
Oh, did he stop? Is that what you're saying?
That was one of
The things that he... I mean, if... You see, Shatabi is in a very interesting era because he is... Right, like... He's not at the absolute demise of Al-Andalus, but he's pretty close. But he doesn't see it kind of falling or anything like this. He's still a few generations before it actually collapses. But in his time, the politics have well taken off in the Nasrid dynasty. So it's assassination after assassination, removal and another, and they don't care about... You know, in fact, the one that they called Muhammad al-Faqih, the one that they called the scholar, he had that name. When he... Even when, you know, when he's so devastated with, like, they're getting absolutely pounded and they're losing territory and they're going to get attacked. And then he calls for help from Yaqub al-Marini, Abu Yusuf Yaqub al-Marini, to come over. And he does. He comes over and just doesn't bring like a staggering army or anything, but they actually restore the Muslim territory. And when he does, he says that, okay, like this is, you know what, this is good. And what we'll do in order to safeguard this, we'll keep some representatives here in Malaga. He says we'll keep them in Malaga. So, and he leaves his son there. And he comes back. And this is somebody who saved huge territory, including like later on Gibraltar and including Tarif and all these places. He's saved that and he's just coming back now. He's left it. He's going back. He's just left his... And Muhammad al-Faqih is like, yeah, that's a brilliant idea, brilliant. And as soon as he's gone, he says he's saying that, وَإِنَّ فِي التَّارِيخِ لَعِبَرًا. And they say, you know, that's like as Sayyidina Ali said, that, you know, كَلِمَةُ حَقٍ أُرِيدَ بِهَا الْبَاطِلِ. That's a word of truth by which only falsehood can really be kind of sought out. That, you know, what he says is, oh, indeed, history has lessons in it for us. Which is actually a positive statement, but he's using it in the sense that, I'm giving these guys territory. You know what happens when we give the North Africans territory? They're going to take over. So what does he do? He betrays him with the Christians to get him. He gets him done over, and then when it kind of backfires, goes and calls Yaqub al-Marini again, who forgives him and comes again and says, and then he betrays him again. Oh my God, ya salam! Seriously, wallahi. You have to, but that's just the trailer. The DVD you're going to get to watch in front of the Al-Hamra, inshallah.
You should put a few pictures of Cordoba behind you.
Well, inshallah. Right, so, na'am. Where did we get to? So, yep,
the
so,
safe, the sword.
Yep, and mentioning, having praise, mentioning verse, doing dua for the Aimma, ruku' qablaha ma lam yakhrujil imam. So what he means by ruku' here is salah, like you don't pray, like praying before is recommended, but before the imams come out for the minbar. Once he comes out, you don't pray. وَتَرْكُ الرُّكُوبِ فِي السَّعِي إِلَيْهَا. Rather than riding, it's better to walk to the masjid. وَكَثْرَةُ الذِّكْرِ وَالدُّعَاء. Increasing in your dhikr and dua, and giving charity if you can before it. So, no.
وممنوعاتها المختصة بها عشر: البيع والشراء بعد النداء لها إلى انقضاء صلاتها، والتنفل بالصلاة منذ يخرج الإمام على الناس للخطبة والتنفل بعدها في المسجد وهو للإمام أشد كراهية والكلام والإمام يخطب والاشتغال بقول أو فعل يمنعك أو يمنع غيرك من الإنصات له وتخطي الرقاب منذ يجلس الإمام على المنبر وصلاتها في المواضع المحجرة المملكة أو على ظهر المسجد أو المنار وأن تجمع في جامعين في مصر واحد والسفر يوم الجمعة قرب الصلاة.
Shukran. Right, these are those things which are forbidden or prohibited and are specific to Jum'ah, that buying or selling after the adhan has taken place. There is a difference that if you have bought or sold, is that transaction invalid? I mean, there's a debate, but generally it isn't necessarily invalid, but it shouldn't be done really. So, and the thing is, because the focus is on getting to Jum'ah.
When he says mamnu' here, is it like before where it was more karaha than...
What do you mean?
Remember before he used that term?
Oh, you mean like before he used it to include all?
Yeah.
Right, so will there be some things, there may be some things which are actually just makruh that he includes, but he means like things which shouldn't be done. But he's generally, right now, that is something that shouldn't be done, as in it's forbidden, like buying and selling. What tanafful bi salah, right, once the imam has kind of come out to the actual mimbar to do, right, for you to then start in nafal is forbidden. After the khutbah has taken place, or after the salah, sorry, وَالتَّنَفُّلْ بَعْدَهَا فِي الْمَسْجِدِ. Right now, this could be interpreted as in two ways. If you interpret it to mean after the khutbah, then you would be talking about it being forbidden, because the actual salah is about to start. If you're interpreting this to mean when he's saying laha is going back to the salah, then it would only be makruh, that after the salah, they do encourage that after the salah people tend to go and they pray their nafal or whatever it is at home. So both ways it could be interpreted, and it's even more intense for the imam. Right. Now, wal kalam wal imam yakhtub, speaking whilst the imam is giving a speech is forbidden. Wal ishtighal biqawl, being distracted with anything whilst the imam is giving his speech is forbidden. Passing through people that are seated, like passing through their necks and shoulders and moving them aside, and that appears in the hadith as though it's forbidden. At the very least, it's discouraged, it's makruh, at the very least. What ulama say is, if you needed to do it, then okay, like imagine some people they've seated themselves here and there's plenty of space over there and they're moving forward, and really that's where you're going to have to sit, then you're going to have to kind of go forward. In that case, you could do takhatti al-riqab, you could kind of go through them, but generally just for the sake of it, somebody shouldn't like, oh, I'm going to go right to the front and sit right, like it shouldn't really be like that. And also, wasalatuha, praying in particular places which are totally private, and they're not, but this wouldn't really apply so much to us in this context. It means more like if you made something elitist and we only do Jummah here, nobody else can kind of come into that wouldn't be allowed. Or praying on the roof of a masjid, they mention, or in a minaret, or that you pray in two different masjids in a town, right? Now, and then they mention traveling close to the time of Jummah, right? Now these last 2 points I'll mention, that more than one masjid in a city or a town is permitted previously, and ideally there should be one type of masjid where everybody goes to. That would be brilliant for Jummah, but that was when places were just small towns, not when they became these massive cities. People like very early scholars, like students of Imam Malik, like Ibn Abdul Hakam, then after him you have people like Yahya ibn Imran, Ibn Qassar from the Baghdadiyin. All these people wrote that, look, having more than one masjid is fine, because if there is a need to do so. Even Lakhmi writes about, he says if a masjid gets full and people have to go outside and pray outside, then that's fine, because obviously it's full, so it's not really a problem. So, and the other thing about traveling, if there was an absolute need and you had to, then okay, but generally you shouldn't be like, alright guys, what should we do? I know, let's go get some food in a different city now. Or just travel out, so we're going to end up missing Jummah, and that wouldn't be allowed, really. Like, you should be praying Jummah. I mean, if there was something you had to do, therefore you're traveling for that reason, then fine. I mean, you can miss Jummah. Now.
ومفسداتها المختصة بها 10. يفسد صلاة الجمعة كل ما ذكرنا أنه يفسد صلاة الفرض، وتخصها هي عشرة أمور: نقص فرض من فرائضها المختصة بها، وأن تصلى 4، وانفضاد الناس عن إمامهم فيها، وتركه حتى خطب وحده أو صلى وحده أو في جماعة لا تقوم بهم الجمعة، ولا تصح الصلاة له ولا لمن بقي معه، وخروج وقتها وهو إلى الغروب، وقيل هو إلى دخول وقت العصر، وقيل إلى الاصفرار، وأن يخطب رجل ويصلي آخر قصدا لذلك، أو واليان طرأ أحدهما على الآخر، وأن يكون بين الخطبة والصلاة مدة طويلة، فإن ذلك يوجب إعادتها، وأن تكون الجمعة قد صليت في ذلك المصر اليوم بتمام شروطها، فلا تجزئ بعد لغيرهم إلا في مصر عظيم لا يقوم بأهله جامع واحد، وأن يكون إتمام الصلاة مع الآخرين فتجزئهم ولا تجزئ الأولين.
Okay, this is now dealing with those matters which invalidate the salah, and especially to do with Jum'ah. Now, naqsu fardin min fara'idha, obviously detracting any type of obligatory action from Jum'ah will invalidate it. That's with any fard prayer. That's with any prayer, actually. Or if a person prayed it double its amount. Naturally, if you double something, you've changed its entire nature. Like, it's not that salah now would be, you couldn't really call it Jum'ah anymore. If everybody abandoned the imam, if everybody got up and if they did a walkout, for example, that would be, if they went on strike, that Jum'ah wouldn't be valid for the imam either, right? So now if the imam prayed on his own or he did his khutbah on his own, so imagine the imam's turned up. Surprisingly, it's a local area, so nobody's turned up on time. So if it's because of that, the imam says, you know, I don't care, I'm going to begin my khutbah. So he begins his khutbah and finishes it and nobody's turned up. That khutbah would be invalid, right? So it wouldn't actually count. Neither would it be if he started his salah, Jum'ah on his own. It wouldn't be valid. Then they mention, or if there is a jama'ah that is insufficient in number. So basically, with the Maliki, they will say like a handful is really insufficient. Jum'ah should have at least a certain number that you would call a group. Now, or if its time has gone out, and then there's a difference about to what extent can Jum'ah be prayed. And some have said, he mentions that it is till sunset. Like meaning, because in the Maliki madhab we know Dhuhr can extend into Asr time, as Maghrib can extend into Isha time. So like, based on that principle, this being a substitute for Jum'ah, it can, as for Dhuhr, it can extend into Asr time, and you can pray it then. Or some have said no, just up until Asr time, that if a person was to do the khutbah and another person was to lead the salah, generally the Maliki don't allow that. They say unless there was such a reason for something like that, it shouldn't be like that. It should be that the khatib is the one who leads the salah, right? So that's another condition. And then he mentions أَوَّالِيَانِ طَرَأَ أَحَدُهُمَا عَلَى الْآخَرِ. Right, now this is obviously because you see this is going back to the fact that if the wali was the one leading the salah, so the governor is the one leading the salah, and then all of a sudden, like in between, there's a coup. Because sometimes, believe it or not, that coups would take place at Jummah. Because one, it was a point when the Amir would actually come out. So quite often he was hidden behind his fortresses, and even like when, like let's say you see the Al-Hamra, you see that within it, right, as an example from Al-Andalus, that they had their elite residents, like perhaps they say about between 1,500 to 2,000 people living inside the actual Al-Hamra. But then they had the major residents at the time, maybe up to, they say like something like, what did they say, like 60,000 or something, or was it the residents, the total? But at the time they had like several, like thousands living as the main residents outside, and the main masjid for the city was outside Al-Hamra. It was in the main city. Now the Caliph would, you see, he would obviously, I mean, if he was to come out, I'm sure maybe he did, maybe he didn't, depending on who, but that's when his life would really be kind of, it could be compromised or in danger, and because that's a good time for an assassination. It's a good time for a coup. And sometimes you see that that's what, you know, when the new ruler would come, you see, it's also ideal because it's now everybody would see who you are. So it's like Hajjaj when he comes and they take the Imam off and he rises on the mimbar. He sits. Allah. He goes, and he says the poem, An ibn Jalla wa Talla'i Thanaya Mata Ada ila Imamata Ta'rifuni. That, Allah, that, it's a poem from like the Arabs before, and he says that I'm, like, basically says I'm the son of so and so, like a person that was like a great explorer and somebody did this and that. But then the second part of it, he says, you see, the Arabs, when they would go to war, they would wear, quite often there was a trend, especially in the early days, they would wear a specific type of imama, like a black imama, like a turban meant that this is war. So the second part of the poem, he says, when I put my imama on, he says, you will know who I am. It's one of those, like he rises upon the mimbar and he says that. And then obviously he apart from the fact that they've just killed so many people as well, nobody's going to speak up. He says, if anybody wants to speak, speak now. Isn't it? Then he goes on in one of the speech, he carries on a bit, because he used to do his own khutbahs, and he carries on a bit, and somebody gets up, goes, Hajjaj, he goes, cut it out with the speech and get on with the salah. And he goes, he's a bit too eager to get to Jannah. He goes, will you send him there? Disposed of, they execute the guy. But he was very ruthless in executions. He really didn't care who he executed. But
what was it in Andalus?
That wasn't Andalus, by the way. That was the Baghdad. Andalus was chilled. Andalus just had betrayal and treachery and poetry, and that's what it had. But
Mufti, one thing where it says وَأَنْ يَخْطُبَ رَجُلٌ
نعم
وَيُصَلِّي آخَرُ
yeah.
قَصْدًا لِذَلِكَ.
Yeah.
What does that mean in fiqh terms?
That means that a person, it shouldn't be intended like that. Unless there was an absolute emergency, the one who does the khutbah should lead the salah. You shouldn't have like, I'll do the khutbah, you do the salah. It shouldn't be like that. Right, okay. وَأَنْ يَكُونَ بَيْنَ الْخُطْبَةِ وَالصَّلَاةِ مُدَّةٌ طَوِيلَةٌ. That you shouldn't have such a gap between the khutbah and the salah. Like everybody says, okay, I've done the khutbah now we're going to watch this movie, and then afterwards we'll come back and pray the salah. You'd have to repeat the khutbah. Then they mention that if the Jummah has been prayed already in that town, and this really once again is to do with the ideal type of towns that were small and just had one masjid in there, and it's not really talking about the urbanized type of cities in which we live today. So that really doesn't really bother us or affect us too much. Now, وتتغير أحكام هذه الصلوات, how the salawat generically, including Jummah and all of them, can be impacted due to circumstances. He will now explain, and then that will kind of be the end of, inshallah, today's section. So, na'am.
وتتغير أحكام هذه الصلوات المفروضة وصورها بعشرة أسباب، كصلاة الجمعة بالقصر والجهر، وكصلاة الخوف في جماعة بتفريق صلاتها، وكصلاة المسافر كيفما أمكنه، وبالتقصير في السفر، وبعذر المرض المانع من استيفاء أركانها فيصلي ما قدر عليه، وبعذر الإكراه والمنع فيصلي ما قدر عليه، وبالجمع للمسافر يجد به السير فيجمع أول الوقت أو وسطه أو آخره بحسب سيره، وبالجمع ليلة المطر للعشاءين قبل مغيب الشفق وبالجمع للحاج بعرفة بين الظهر والعصر أول الزوال وبمزدلفة بين العشاءين وبالجمع للمريض يخاف أن يغلب على عقله أول الوقت وإن كان الجمع أرفق به فوسطه.
نعم شكرا. Those rulings the rulings by which salah can be affected based upon circumstances. So like Jum'ah in terms of qasr and jahar, okay, like he says the way to Salat al-Jum'ah, in this sense he's trying to say that the way Salat al-Jum'ah has been kind of shortened in essence, and the way it's, because essentially it's kind of come from Dhuhr down to kind of Jum'ah really, which is now shorter, and it's also audible. It's the only daylight prayer which is audible generally, yeah. So وكصلاة الخوف في جماعة بتفريق صلاتها. Salat al-Khawf is when people pray during a time of fear, like usually soldiers and so on, and there's so many variations to how Salat al-Khawf can be offered. And really one of the way the Malikiya tend to do it is with quite some ease actually. The way they would do it is, let's say you're praying 2 rak'at, so what you would do is the Imam would begin, he would have a group of people behind him, a row, and he would have another group that are standing guard, and they're waiting, like standing guard, they're holding their positions. When the Imam reaches, like he's done his 2 sujood, instead of standing up, he would stay seated. Once he's done his 2 sujood, he would kind of stand up. But what would happen is the people behind him would just finish their salah and they would go. He would just wait, he'd let them finish. They would go, they would swap positions with the ones who were on watch. They would now come and join the Imam. He would complete his 2nd rak'ah. They would stand up and make up for 1 rak'ah that they've missed. That's how Salatul Khawf is done. That's the Maliki type of understanding in general, which is much easier than the Hanafi type of one, in which they say that the first group will kind of stand up, but they, when he stood up with them, they won't finish off their 2nd rak'ah. They will just go swap positions. The other one would come, pray 1 with the Imam, then stand up, catch up their 2nd one, then go. Then the first group would come back, finish their 2nd. It's a lot more confusing how they understood. The Hanafi school kind of understood. It's a bit more complicated, if you like. Abu Yusuf, however, what's transmitted from him is said that Salat al-Khawf was actually abrogated, and it was only specific to the time of the Prophet ﷺ and not after. But the importance of it was to show really this sense of, obviously people would say the importance of Jama'ah and stuff, but it also to show solidarity and to kind of keep, because people, it's a time when people might be kind of, like obviously because of the emotions, the adrenaline, the this, the that, and it's a time to keep everybody still kind of linked and connected. So
Mufti, just to clarify, if it's a 2 rak'ah salah,
yeah.
One group prays with the Imam whilst the others guard. Yeah. After half the salah, whether it's 4 or whether it's whatever, after half the salah they swap.
No, they finish.
They finish.
Like whilst he just waits, the Imam waits. Like he's not.
Yeah,
they do taslim.
So they've done like 1 or 2 rak'ahs depending on whether it's a 2 or 4 rak'ah prayer.
Yeah.
Then they've gone to stand guard.
Yep.
And the other group comes in.
Yeah, they join the Imam in his 2nd rak'ah now.
Yeah.
So they're going to be masbuq.
Everybody just prays half the salah then.
Will it always be 2 rak'ahs?
Presumably, unless it was Maghrib, but presumably, because the thing is that obviously, because you're going to be travelling, usually, because this was for battles, it wasn't usually. But it could be technically 4 salah, like if it was a defensive battle in your city. You could like be praying 4. It's the same method. It doesn't really make a difference.
But each of the people behind just pray half the salah.
No, they pray it full.
How do they make it up then?
No, like as the Imam let's say it's a 2 rak'ah salah.
Yeah.
So the Imam stood for his 2nd, they've stood, but he's not going to pray. He's just going to stand, wait for them to finish. They're going to go. The other group are going to come as masbuq. So they've caught now the Imam in the 2nd rak'ah. He's going to pray the 2nd, do salam. They're going to stand up and make up the
How does
missed
he know
rak'ah.
when they're beyond it?
How does he know?
How does he know when the first group is finished and the second group has arrived?
Yeah, he'll be able to see it. Like, it won't be like...
Around.
No, but there'll be like long... There'll be like usually long rows, isn't it? You'll see
If
that
he stood in front and they'll be behind.
probably be quite noisy then,
They'll say
shuffling
yes,
about,
salam
wouldn't it? So
alaikum.
it's quiet again.
And then they leave. And
What he'll do,
and then there's come and they say,
He'll put-
Allahu Akbar.
Yeah. If they're not going to say salam alaikum, there's loads of
nah, what he'll do is he'll switch his camera on reverse on his iPhone and just hold it like that, and you can see what's going on behind him.
We have a mirror.
Take a selfie whilst he's doing it.
We're just gonna do this.
And so
Assalamu alaikum. When they say assalamu alaikum.
yeah, he'll know.
Somebody else's turn it though.
Didn't he say we don't need the salam? Where's the whole friend?
Okay, so
Mufti would never be there.
right, okay, so right now
How
let's
do you know?
right, okay, let's
Oh
right, okay, let's come back to right. This is being recorded, right? So let's come back to here. Now, right. So where are we? Kasarat al-musafir. Yep. Also, the way the musafir can pray in any type of direction for the non-obligatory prayers, and also shortening a prayer due to safar.
Is there any khilaf on the issue of direction?
A direction for nafil is fine, but for fard, no. The khilaf is on witr and stuff like that, but generally the fard, they would say qibla is a shart. Now, or if a person was ill in such a way that they couldn't pray properly, then those things, according to those circumstances, change. Or if there was coercion, the person was forced, or a traveller can actually combine between prayers. Qadi Iyad does mention here إِذَا جَدَّ بِهِ السَّيْرِ, or he mentions يَجِدُّ بِهِ السَّيْرِ. This is also the wording of Ibn Abi Zayd, which does by its apparent suggest that it's with the condition of mobility, that they're actually mobile. They can't be settled for them to combine. That is not the understanding of many of the other Malikiyya, including people like Al-Hafidh ibn Abd al-Barr, or Qadi Abu ibn al-Arabi, or Ibn Rushd al-Jadd. All these people say that, Jaddu Sayr laysa bishart. That it's not a condition, you don't have to be actually mobile, but you just be on your journey, whatever, it's fine.
So if you were staying somewhere for a couple of days, then you could for then continue a few days where you're staying and combine your two salat.
Combining, yes. I mean, if you needed to. Like if you wanted to.
Let's say
and
you're a
needed
resident, for example, you're travelling, you're staying somewhere for 3 days.
Yeah, definitely. You can,
And then
combine. You can shorten as well for those.
Shorten is not an issue. The shorten, I'm just asking about the combining.
Yeah, they
Day
actually.
2, day 3, you'd still be able to combine your prayers.
Yeah, they actually. You see, ironically, it's the other way around. Shortening is more of an issue. Because combining, they actually allow for even regular people who are resident, if you're feeling ill, even if, like Ashab would say, even if it was a haja, he went to that extent saying that even for a haja, you can just combine based on the hadith of Ibn Abbas. And so, it's more of, shortening is strict because obviously you're missing half the entire prayer. So it's more of an issue.
What does Jadd mean here? With Jadd
Jadd-
seriousness, isn't it?
Yeah, like if, it's like saying if, basically if, you know,
Things
if
get
it-
heavy.
if things get tough in moving, like if the whole moving gets,
Okay.
it's an expression.
The going gets tough.
When the going gets tough, it's like that. Or there's another expression which could have been mentioned, which we won't mention because it's being recorded.
Don't worry, who was
Right, so right, he mentions that you could pray either in the first time, the middle, or the end. However, it kind of plays out really, however it's more convenient. Or he mentions to combine on during a night of rain before the time of Isha has come in. Now this Ibn Arabi, Qadi Abu Ibn Arabi says it includes in places of rain, he says like shortening for rain is also permitted in places of rain, in places where it constantly rains. He says fi biladina fil Andalus, like in Al-Andalus, although when we were told by our guide that no, it hardly ever rains here in Al-Andalus, and shortly after him having said that, it just poured down right non-stop for hours, right? But Ibn Arabi says even if it's in places like Al-Andalus which has a lot of rain, he says that it still is fine to combine for rain. So, or combining for during the Hajj for Arafah between Dhuhr and Asr, during Dhuhr time, or in Muzdalifah between Al-Isha wal Maghrib, or for the ill person to combine in case he's afraid of either consciousness or afraid of something else, he can combine at the beginning. وَإِن كَانَ الْجَمْعُ أَرْفَقْ بِهِ فَوَسَطُ. Or if it's just out of convenience, he could maybe combine during the middle, in between time of both. With that, we've come to an end of Salatul Jum'ah. He will now then start to discuss what is Salatul Jama'ah, the conditions for it, the obligations upon the Imam, what is recommended, then for the Ma'mum, the one who follows. That will then be followed by Eid, we'll take a look at. Then the prayer for rain. You've got Kusuf for the eclipse, Witr, Fajr, and Janaiz. So we've still got quite a few yet before we, inshallah, move on to his next section, which will be Taharat. So with that, we bring today's dars to an end. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.